I've just seen an interesting graph. Now, I should emphasize, or I should state that the graph is from 2013. It is FBI statistics on homicides, but it is really quite striking. Um, this was posted by presumably Latino guy because his name's Gonzalez. But basically, it's talking about the demographics of homicide victims in the United States regarding black and white, that is, it's not including Hispanic, Native American, and so on, Asian, but thinking specifically about black and white. And the source is the FBI crime reports, homicide data table 6. This is 2013, so it is 7 years ago, but I can't imagine data has altered that much in 7 years. Maybe a bit different now, but this is what the graph basically shows. Um, so the figures or the proportion of black people killed by other black people is 53.94%. The proportion of white killed people killed by other white people is 10.22%. The proportion of black people killed by white people is 0.77%. This is out of all homicides in the United States. And the proportion of white people killed by black people is 9.83%. And if you add that up, there's going to be some left over. That's going to be for Hispanic, Pacific Islander, Asian murders, I assume. Um, that's striking. So just over half of all homicides in the United States are black on black. So this mantra of Black Lives Matter, I think, I made the previous video on Black Lives Matter. One thing I didn't really speak about so much is where I feel the organization, the movement, is fundamentally dishonest in its message. It's one of my main issues with Black Lives Matter. I think they're dishonest because the narrative they put out there is we're not against all lives being recognized. We're just saying that right now Black Lives Matter in the context of police brutality. But even if you look at the figures for police killings, that is, police killing suspects, it's still, in actual de facto terms, majority white people shot by the police. Now, proportionally speaking, it may be that African Americans are disproportionately represented by that. But then you have to look at the ratio of crime statistics. I mean, who's committing the crime? Um, this is not to say that there are not racist cops. It's not to say that there isn't corruption. But it is to say that Black Lives Matter is not talking about the whole situation. They're putting an overly simplistic narrative that basically it's just rampaging racist white cops killing black men for fun. And they're making out that every situation is akin to what happened to George Floyd. I don't believe it is. I mean, CNN now is reporting another case, guy by the name of Rashard Brooks, I believe, in yeah, Rashard Brooks in Georgia, in the Atlanta metropolitan area. So I haven't looked in depth in this case, but according to the Wikipedia article, the Fulton County Medical Examiner declares Richard Brooks' death a homicide. Brooks was shot in the back by an Atlanta police officer, doesn't say what race the police officer is, while fleeing from an attempted arrest for driving under the influence in which he took an officer's taser and fired it at him on June the 12th. Doesn't exactly sound like an innocent person here. This guy is already suspected of driving under the influence. He takes a police officer's taser. Um, but CNN is already all over this, and they're already putting it out there, and they're already clearly trying to put a lot of focus on that story. I really do think CNN particularly has a lot to answer for in terms of how it handles race relations, because whenever there is a black fatality and a white perpetrator, CNN will absolutely do that story to death. You can be sure of it. Yet when it is a white victim, they basically ignore it. Similar criticisms have been made of the BBC in how they have absolutely ignored racist murders of white people. And I cited three examples in this country of that happening: the murders of Ross Parker, um, and two other guys. Don't recall their names off the top of my head, but if you just bear with me, I keep mentioning this because I think that the way the press handles race issues really does require some big question marks. Ross Parker, um, Chris Donald, and Richard Everett. These were three white teenage boys murdered by racist gangs. In all three cases, I understand the murder of Richard Everett in London caused some racial tensions, but in all three cases, the media basically underreported the crimes in a way that you could be absolutely sure would not be the case if there was a minority victim and a white suspect. The only example I can find or I can think of where there was a minority victim and a white culprit was the racist murder of an elderly Muslim man in Birmingham in 2013, a Ukrainian neo-Nazi. In that situation, um, the murder of Lee Rigby got a lot more attention. So I think there are real questions as to media, how the media handles these things. I don't like to sort of just blame the media for everything, but I do think when they are being so inconsistent and when they are trying to always find a racist angle when it might not be there. I mean, this death of Rashard Brooks, we don't know what the motivation was, but CNN's already going to be trying to spin the narrative. Oh, it's another black man killed by. I don't know what the officer is, if he was a white officer or not. I haven't looked into the story, but I am pretty sure that CNN will be spinning it that way as a racial thing. Um, and you have to wonder why. What is their agenda? Um, it's. I don't believe it's a case of they're just the messengers. I definitely think CNN has an ideological agenda with this. I'm just looking now at the report. Um, it says video of the incident went viral. Atlanta Chief of Police Erica Sands resigned the next day, saying she wanted to help rebuild trust in the community. Protesters later burned down the Wendy's store where the shooting had taken place. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Burned down the business because a black guy died outside it. Um, I'm just trying to find out the race of the officer. It's not stated. Um, Not saying anything about it. I haven't seen the video. He might be a white officer. He might not. But here's the irony. Demonstrators gathered at the site of the shooting on June the 12th and 13th. On June the 13th, protesters burned down a Wendy's restaurant outside which Brooks was shot, torched several cars near the restaurant, and broke the camera of a CNN reporter. So all their bias in their coverage of this hasn't exactly helped them. Their offices in Atlanta were also trashed by the rioters a few weeks ago, or at least part of it was. So CNN, all their virtue signaling and all their bias in the way they've handled this hasn't exactly paid off. I do have questions for Black Lives Matter. Look at the situation of Black Africans, right? Because this has become a worldwide thing. That's why I'm talking about this now. It's not just the United States and Britain, it's become a worldwide thing. Look at the tens of thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of black Africans killed under brutal black dictatorships in the post independence years. Look at Idi Amin. So many people killed that there were actually power shortages in the country because bodies, the vast majority of them black Africans, were clogging up the reservoirs. Look at the regime of Robert Mugabe, totally bankrupted his country, an absolute tyrant. Um, Look at Emperor Bokassa, so called. Look at Mobutu Sese Seko. Look at Omar al Bashir, whom the Sudanese people overthrew last year. The list goes on. They're only the better known examples. Hissène Habré in Chad. There's many, many others. And yes, the occasional white dictator as well. But the sheer hypocrisy of Pan Africanists who actually go out of the way to marbilize these guys and to put them in a sort of to put them in a position above criticism. To say that any criticism of their record, so it's just jealous Europeans, or they can't bear to see a black African leader leading his nation. Except these guys didn't lead their nation; they brutalized their nations. Because Pan Africanists cannot think objectively. Their whole mantra is to always, always defend black leaders because they're black leaders. And if it's a demagogue like Idi Amin, who, was constantly stirring up resentment at outsiders, Mugabe done the same thing, um, that just lends into their ideology because they're great Pan African heroes. The thing is, in some cases, these figures did start off as genuinely admired revolutionary leaders, who in some cases did get independence for their countries. But I say, if we are now in a situation where there is a demand for historic figures in Britain to have their legacies questioned, like Churchill, like Cromwell, like others, that's fine. Let's have an honest debate about their record. But that's something Black Lives Matter is pushing. Are they going to be saying the same thing for Black African leaders? Or are they going to say, no, no, you can't criticize them because they were great national leaders? They were symbols of anti-colonialism. It's sheer hypocrisy. Clearly, not all Black Lives Matter. Over 600 Black Nigerians have been killed this year in Boko Haram attacks. Over 600. Where's the concern about them? So this is why I don't have much time for Black Lives Matter. I think not only are they deliberately stoking up racial tensions in this country, but they are fundamentally dishonest. The narrative that they're putting out is a false one. It's not to say that there's no legitimate concerns about police brutality. That is not what I'm saying. I do think there's real problems with police brutality. I do think that there is serious questions, particularly with American police, as to how they are trained. Although I have to say, looking at the Richard Brooks incident, in that case, I think it's very different from the George Floyd case. George Floyd, you had an officer, pinned on the guy's neck. He was saying he couldn't breathe. In this case, you had a suspect who had actually taken something away from the officer, who was running away from the scene, who was under the influence. You know, like I say, I'd need to look more into it. But burning down the Wendy's store, torching cars, what does that do? What does It's just mind-numbing stupidity. And if you speak out against Black Lives Matter, then you must be a racist. It's this sort of toxic identity politics and dishonesty, which is just fueling the flames. And then you get the counter demonstrators. You get the likes of the ADL and Britain First, which are organisations I have no time for. I'm not bedfellows with them at all. I was absolutely robust in my disgust at some of their behaviour the other day in London. But the virtue signalling we're seeing from a lot of politicians, news outlets, the police themselves. Now, in a way, I understand the police want to improve their PR. The best way to do that is to have internal reforms, to really look at their training methods, to look at how they deal with volatile situations, to look at how officers are held to account, i.e., that they're not above the law themselves. Those are all important questions. But Black Lives Matter is turning it into an issue of white cops killing black guys. You know, um, if you had a black officer kill a black suspect, they would ignore it because it wouldn't fit into their narrative. And that angers me because it's fundamentally dishonest and stoking up racial tensions. And again, this is not to downplay police brutality. I am very concerned about that. I think it's a serious problem. And I think anyone who's paying attention should recognize it's a serious problem. But you know what? That is something that affects all Americans. It wasn't long ago I cited the case of a young white guy who was left in hospital because of mistaken identity by federal police, and they never apologized to him. In fact, they tried to smear him with false charges, and he has got about zero chance of real justice. He's white. So I just think there's a lot of dishonesty from Black Lives Matter. And I despise this idea that if you, speak out against them or condemn them in any way, shape, or form, you're somehow okay with anti-black racism, or you're even a racist. There's a lot of dishonesty going on here. And, I don't think the police should have done all that virtue signaling with the knee. At the time, I wasn't sure about it. Now I'm thinking, no, they shouldn't have, because it was showing an ideological bias. It was saying, okay, we're going to now submit to your demand, and we just have to prove we're not all brutes. That's fine. I'm okay with the police winning hearts and minds and engaging with people. That's fine. But taking the knee to protesters, I'm not sure that's the right approach, because the same police will have to deal with rioting when it arises. I'd like to see a lot more honesty from this movement.